The prayer acknowledges that not every opportunity is meant to be pursued and not every closed path is a loss. By trusting God to open and close doors according to His will, the believer releases the pressure to force outcomes or manipulate circumstances. This mindset requires faith because it accepts that divine wisdom sees beyond immediate desires and understands long-term consequences. It is an act of surrender that says success is not defined by how many doors open, but by which ones are opened by God. The request for God to open doors reflects trust in divine timing and preparation. When a door opens through God's guidance, it often comes with peace, confirmation, and provision. The prayer suggests that God prepares hearts, circumstances, and resources before allowing progress. This relieves the believer from striving endlessly for approval or opportunity. Replacing anxiety with patience, it affirms that what is meant for the believer will not require constant struggle to obtain. Equally important is the trust in God to close doors. Closed doors can be painful, confusing, and disappointing. They may feel like rejection or failure, especially when effort and hope have been invested. The prayer reframes these moments as protection rather than punishment. A closed door may be preventing future harm, preserving peace, or redirecting the believer toward a better path. Trusting God in these moments requires humility and patience, recognizing that understanding may come later. The prayer also addresses the temptation to knock repeatedly on doors that were never meant to open. Human nature often clings to familiar paths or desired outcomes even when resistance is constant. By asking God to close the wrong doors, the believer admits the need for restraint and redirection. This shows a willingness to let go of personal plans in favor of divine purpose, even when it requires change or discomfort. Trusting God with open and closed doors also creates emotional stability. Instead of being shaken by rejection or delay, the believer remains grounded in faith. Success and setbacks are no longer personal measurements of worth, but part of a guided journey. This perspective brings peace in uncertainty and hope in transition, allowing the believer to move forward without resentment or fear. Ultimately, this key point reflects confidence in divine oversight. It affirms that God is actively involved in directing the path of life, not passively observing it. By trusting God to open the right doors and close the wrong ones, the believer walks with assurance that every step, pause, and redirection serves a greater purpose, even when the full picture is not yet clear. The prayer begins by surrendering the very first moments of the day to the Holy Spirit, recognizing that before plans are made, before choices are faced, and before challenges appear, God is already present. It is an act of humility that admits human limitation and divine authority at the same time. By inviting the Holy Spirit to go ahead of the day, the speaker is not asking for a reaction to problems, but for preparation before problems arise. This reflects deep faith that God is not caught off guard by anything that will happen and that His presence in advance changes outcomes. This surrender shifts the mindset from control to trust. Instead of waking up anxious about tasks, deadlines, or unknown encounters, the heart rests in the belief that every moment has already been seen and accounted for by God. It acknowledges that while human eyes can only see the present moment, God sees the entire path from beginning to end. Inviting the Holy Spirit to go first means choosing to walk into the day with confidence rather than fear, with peace rather than panic. The act of asking God to go before us also reflects dependence. It is a declaration that success is not based solely on effort, intelligence, or strength, but on divine guidance. It recognizes that even well-intended plans can fail if they are not aligned with God's will. By placing the day in God's hands, the speaker is saying, I don't want to move unless you lead, and I don't want to arrive unless you've already prepared the way. There is also a sense of spiritual covering in this invitation. When the Holy Spirit goes ahead, obstacles lose their power to surprise or destroy. Challenges may still come, but they are met with assurance rather than shock. This mindset replaces the fear of the unknown with trust in God's foreknowledge. It allows the believer to step into conversations, responsibilities, and decisions with calmness, knowing that nothing will be faced alone. Inviting the Holy Spirit first thing in the morning sets the tone for the entire day. It establishes spiritual priority before emotional reactions take control. Instead of the mind being led by stress, it is led by faith. Instead of the heart being shaped by circumstances, it is shaped by God's presence. This creates an inner alignment where actions flow from guidance rather than impulse. Ultimately, this key point reflects a daily practice of surrender and trust. It is not about avoiding difficulty, but about walking through the day with divine leadership. It affirms that God is not just invited into emergencies, but into ordinary moments. By asking the Holy Spirit to go before the day begins, the speaker chooses faith over fear, guidance over guesswork, and peace over pressure, trusting that wherever the day leads, God has already gone ahead. The prayer emphasizes a powerful shift from fear to faith by grounding confidence in the assurance of God's presence. Fear often enters when the future feels uncertain, when outcomes are unknown, or when responsibility feels heavier than strength. This part of the message confronts that fear directly, not by denying the reality of challenges, but by redefining who walks into them. When the believer understands that God is present, fear no longer has authority over the heart or the mind. Walking without fear does not mean walking without awareness. It means refusing to let anxiety dictate decisions or emotions. The prayer declares that fear loses its grip when divine presence leads the way. Instead of reacting to situations with panic, the believer is invited to respond with trust. This trust is not based on circumstances improving, but on the unchanging nature of God's protection and guidance. It creates a steady inner posture that remains calm even when the outer world is unsettled. The prayer also recognizes that fear often disguises itself as wisdom or caution. It can sound like logic, telling the mind to expect the worst or to prepare for failure. This message dismantles that false security by reminding the believer that God's presence offers a higher form of safety. When God goes ahead, danger does not have the final word. Even if obstacles arise, they are not faced alone, and they are not faced unprepared. There is a deep emotional reassurance in knowing that God's presence surrounds every step. Fear thrives in isolation, but faith grows in companionship with God. The prayer affirms that no moment of the day is walk in solitude. Whether entering difficult conversations, making heavy decisions, or facing unexpected resistance, the believer carries the confidence that divine strength is near. This awareness transforms hesitation into boldness and worry into peace. Walking without fear also impacts behavior and character. When fear is removed, patience increases, clarity sharpens, and compassion deepens. Decisions are made with wisdom rather than urgency. Words are spoken with grace rather than defensiveness. The prayer suggests that fear not only weakens the spirit, but distorts judgment, and that freedom from fear allows the believer to move in alignment with God's purpose rather than self-protection. This part of the speech ultimately invites the listener to exchange the burden of control for the gift of trust. It reminds the heart that God's presence is not symbolic but active, not distant but involved. Fear may attempt to rise throughout the day, but it does not get to rule. By choosing to walk with confidence rooted in God's presence, the believer steps into the day with courage, stability, and peace that cannot be shaken by circumstances. The prayer places strong emphasis on the inner life of the believer, recognizing that the greatest battles of the day are often fought in the mind before they ever appear in actions or words. By asking for wisdom in thoughts, words, and decisions, the speaker acknowledges that unguarded thinking can lead to unnecessary conflict, regret, and confusion. Thoughts shape attitudes, attitudes shape words, and words shape outcomes. This awareness invites divine guidance at the very root of behavior. Guarding the mind is an act of spiritual discipline. The prayer reflects a desire to resist negative patterns such as fear, anger, pride, and impatience that can easily take control when emotions are unchecked. Instead of allowing thoughts to spiral into worst-case scenarios or emotional reactions, the believer asks for clarity and calm. This creates space for wisdom to rise above impulse, allowing decisions to be made with understanding rather than urgency. The prayer also highlights the power of words. Speech has the ability to build or destroy, to heal or to harm. By seeking wisdom before speaking, the believer chooses restraint over reaction. This is especially important in moments of pressure, disagreement, or misunderstanding. The prayer reflects a desire for words that bring peace rather than conflict, truth rather than confusion, and grace rather than offense. It recognizes that careless words spoken in emotion can undo what patience and humility could have protected. Decision-making is another critical focus of this key point. Every day presents choices that seem small but carry lasting impact. The prayer acknowledges that human judgment is limited and that even good intentions can lead to poor outcomes without divine insight. By asking God to guide decisions, the believer expresses a willingness to slow down, to listen, and to align choices with a higher purpose. This posture resists impulsive decisions driven by pressure, comparison, or fear of missing out. The prayer also reflects self-awareness. It admits that emotions can cloud judgment and that personal desires can sometimes override wisdom. Rather than trusting feelings alone, the believer seeks discernment. This discernment helps separate what feels right in the moment from what is right in the long term. It allows the believer to respond thoughtfully rather than react emotionally, maintaining integrity even when circumstances are challenging. Ultimately, this part of the prayer reveals a desire for inner alignment. When thoughts are guided, words are measured, and decisions are wise, life moves in harmony rather than chaos. The believer is not asking to avoid responsibility, but to handle it with grace and understanding by inviting divine wisdom into every level of daily life. The speaker commits to living intentionally, allowing faith to direct the inner life so that the outer life reflects peace, clarity, and purpose. The prayer recognizes that life is filled with competing voices, each demanding attention and influence. Some voices come from people offering opinions, advice, and expectations. Others rise from circumstances, pressure, fear, or urgency. Still others come from within, shaped by past experiences, insecurities, or personal desires. In the middle of all this noise, the prayer seeks one clear source of direction, acknowledging that without divine guidance, it is easy to become confused, overwhelmed, or led in the wrong direction. By asking for God's voice to rise above all others, the believer admits that not every voice carries truth, even when it sounds convincing. Popular opinion, logical reasoning, or emotional impulses can often pull the heart away from what is right. The prayer reflects a deep desire for discernment, the ability to recognize which voices align with truth and which ones distract from purpose. This discernment is essential in a world where information is constant and clarity feels rare. The prayer also highlights the tension between logic and pressure. Logic may suggest one path, while external pressure pushes toward another. Expectations from others can create anxiety and force decisions that are rushed or misaligned. In this space, the prayer asks for divine leadership that goes beyond human understanding. It seeks guidance that is not limited to what looks safe or familiar, but what is purposeful and right. This kind of guidance requires trust, especially when the path forward is unclear or uncomfortable. Listening for God's voice also requires stillness and patience. The prayer implies a willingness to slow down, to quiet the inner noise, and to wait for direction rather than forcing outcomes. In a fast-paced world that rewards quick decisions, this posture of waiting is an act of faith. It reflects confidence that God's timing is better than human urgency, and that clarity will come at the right moment. The prayer acknowledges that confusion can lead to fear, and fear can lead to poor choices. When too many voices compete for control, the mind becomes unsettled. By inviting divine guidance, the believer seeks stability. God's voice brings peace rather than chaos, confirmation rather than confusion. It anchors the heart and provides assurance even when circumstances remain uncertain. This key point also emphasizes obedience. Hearing God's voice is not enough unless there is willingness to follow it. The prayer reflects a surrendered heart, ready to move when led and to stop when redirected. It shows trust that divine guidance protects from unnecessary struggle and aligns life with a greater purpose. By choosing to follow God's voice above all others, the believer positions themselves to walk with confidence, clarity, and peace, even in the midst of pressure and uncertainty. The prayer expresses a deep awareness that not every threat in life is visible or expected. Some dangers announce themselves clearly, while others are hidden beneath routine moments, familiar paths, or seemingly harmless choices. By asking for protection from danger, temptation, and unseen traps, the believer acknowledges personal vulnerability and the need for divine covering beyond human awareness. This is not a prayer rooted in fear, but in wisdom that understands the limits of human perception. The request for protection recognizes that danger is not always physical. Emotional harm, spiritual wariness, and moral compromise can be just as destructive as visible threats. The prayer seeks safeguarding of the mind and heart, asking that destructive thoughts, negative influences, and harmful patterns be stopped before they take root. It reflects a desire to remain whole, focused, and aligned with purpose throughout the day. Temptation is addressed honestly and without pride. The prayer does not assume strength is enough to resist every pull. Instead, it asks for divine strength to rise where human willpower may fail. Temptation often appears subtle, presenting itself as convenience, opportunity, or relief. The prayer asks for discernment to recognize these moments and for strength to choose integrity over ease. This reflects humility, admitting that no one is immune to being drawn off course. The idea of unseen traps highlights the reality that not every setback is obvious at first. Some traps are relational, disguised as comfort or approval. Others are emotional, rooted in old wounds or unresolved pain. The prayer seeks divine intervention before these traps can cause damage. It asks for redirection when necessary, trusting that God can close paths that seem right but lead to harm. There is also a sense of trust in divine intervention. By asking God to expose danger before it is encountered, the believer expresses faith that protection can come through prevention, not just rescue. This mindset shifts the focus from reacting to crises to avoiding them altogether. It recognizes that sometimes the greatest protection is being kept away from situations that would drain, weaken, or compromise faith. This part of the prayer reflects a longing for safety that goes beyond physical survival. It seeks preservation of purpose, peace, and integrity. By placing trust in God's protection, the believer walks forward without paranoia, confident that divine guidance provides security. The prayer reinforces the belief that even when threats are hidden and challenges are unexpected, God's protection is active, intentional,